Hello, everyone, and welcome to Trad Tasman Talk for another week. I'm Tim Wilms, Editor-in-Chief of the Unshackled, coming to you from my socially distanced, lockdown home studio here. It is 6 p.m. here in Melbourne.
And it is 8 p.m. here in Auckland. I'm in my usual spot, although it looks a little bit different because the green screen's not here. As you can see, Tim's dialed the technology down a little bit because he's had to move out of his office. So, and we're also only streaming on the Unshackled YouTube channel. So we're trying to direct everyone there. And so I'm going to focus on that a little bit more for the next couple of minutes and share it around and make sure everyone comes to the right place. We should hopefully still have a very good show, although the news this week has been rather obvious. One thing really dominating the headlines and all of the news everywhere, and everybody's activities, everybody's lives changed, possibly permanently, and that's going to be the big item on the show tonight.
Now, the reason why we're only streaming to one YouTube channel tonight is because I don't have the advanced broadcasting software that we use in the Unshackled studio. So for now, it's just the Unshackled YouTube channel. The reason why we chose that over the Right Minds channel is because the Unshackled one is monetized. So if you're in the live chat, you can send us directly a super chat by pressing the $sign, typing in your amount and your message, and we'll read it out on the show, because it's important during this time to, if you are still employed and got some dosh, that you support independent media during this time. Who I'm not sure what your media has been like, but ours in Australia has been sensationalizing as much as possible, and also confusing the public as well.
Absolutely, something we talked about last week as well was the fear, the panic, the way the media covers this is going to drive, and has driven a lot of the response, and is going to continue to drive what is happening. They have been deemed essential. They're going to keep running, doing what they do, but their advertising revenue is down, and we'll see how long they last. And then they're going to try and earn money or get bailed out by the government, and they only have one news item to push. And the question is, can the news cycle sustain this when nobody else is doing anything, or will everyone just tune out and watch Netflix as recommended by our state overlords and the police?
There was a lot of fear when people started working from home, and apparently there's been a lot of new sign-ups to Zoom teleconferencing software that our nationalized internet, the nationalized broadband network, would be able to sustain everyone working from home and teleconferencing, Skyping, Zooming, whatever. It's held up so far. I'm on the NBN connection at the moment, so there has been no catastrophic internet failure as they feared. So that's a plus here. We're currently in all Australian states and territories at stage 2 lockdown. We've had our Victorian Premier, Daniel Andrews, saying we will be going to stage 3. That's inevitable, though we don't know what stage 3 entails yet, which shows that they're just sort of making these stages up as they go along, because they never thought they'd need to lock down various parts of the economy and totally shut Australia off from foreigners, and now you're actually banned from leaving Australia unless it's essential travel.
And we did have a little bit of a better plan there. Proper levels of lockdown were announced in New Zealand, and it was planned out with the level 4 being the complete lockdown. Everybody's under house arrest, essentially. You can only leave for essential purposes. And we jumped straight to that after about 3 days of the levels being announced. We started off on level 2, and then it was level 3, and within 48 hours of being on level 3, we were on level 4, and that's where we're at right now. This is the second day of total lockdown in New Zealand, and the internet seems to have held up okay. Those of us who have been able to keep working have been able to keep working, and it's still a case where everything is settling down, and there's a lot of panic going on, and still big queues outside the supermarkets, all kinds of questions around which stores could be open, which stores could be closed, and we can get into that in full detail in a minute. First, the latest statistics in New Zealand is something I should cover. We have nearly 400 cases, so 368 cases in New Zealand at the moment. We had 85 new cases today. We've got some recovery starting to take place. We have 8 in hospital, 1 in the ICU. We've got 0 deaths, and we are nearly now at the targeting capacity for testing. So nearly 1,500 tests per day are being done, which is where we should have been a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, or at least maybe even a month ago. We should have been testing people coming in, but that's not what was happening, obviously, which is why we have all of these cases in the country at the moment. We still have flights coming in at the moment. I checked yesterday, about 12 a day. We're getting, at least in the morning, I was getting planes flying overhead every 5 minutes. And this morning, the same thing continued. So people are still coming back into the country. There was no mandatory quarantine, or that's now been implemented, and the number of flights will continue to come through every day for the rest of the month at least. And people can actually leave the country here still, I believe. I have heard reports of people saying they have got trips overseas planned, but there are still planes flying overseas. So at the borders, it's been lax.
That would be a difference between our travel ban and yours. If you're just going overseas for a vacation, you can't now.
I think the people I've heard about are not going on vacation, but I'm not sure if things are restricted specifically to essential business or other kinds of essential travel. That could definitely be the possibility. But I know there are still going to be flights going for at least the rest of the month, and by that time we should be back into normal mode. So cool. Somebody has mentioned here in the chat, and should say hello to everyone in the chat, that there was no notification for Right Minds on the Right Minds NZ channel, and that's the case. We're actually only streaming on the Unshackled channel. I've been trying to share the Unshackled link with everyone, make sure people are coming through to this channel and this stream, because the Tim doesn't have the technology to stream to both at the moment. We usually run everything through his studio in Melbourne, and then it goes out to the various channels. But now we're getting used to the new lockdown setup, and perhaps the technology will improve over the weeks. But we don't have no idea how long we'll be in this situation.
We've got. I'm still watching Sky News and ABC News quite a bit, and to practice social distancing. So they set a good example for their viewers. That they've had a lot of their contributors and guests Skyping in from home, and obviously you can see behind me I've got Australian flag, Eureka flag. I've got that poster is Austrian economists who, well, our governments are doing what they say that shouldn't be done, which is print money in a crisis. Yeah. And also
borrow lots and lots of money as well.
And I've also building up a book collection here as well, moving all my books here as well. And behind you, you've got, I can see looks like a bookshelf behind you, but it looks empty, and then some flowers. You muted yourself.
Sorry. I've still been typing, so that's why I've been muting myself. Yes, I do have a little bit of a bookshelf behind me, but I think most people might not be able to see it. It's got no books in it, just some equipment, and there are some fake flowers there that people should just be able to see the edge of. Those are fake, and I haven't really put anything behind me because there's actually a window behind me, essentially, and usually the green screen will be up. So that's why there's no fancy setup. But maybe I should try and put some kind of a bookcase and other bits and pieces behind there eventually, especially if I do use this a lot more without the green screen. Who knows?
At the moment in Australia, as we're going to air, total cases 3,166. The most are in New South Wales, which is 1,405. In my home state of Victoria, we have 574, though Queensland is catching up to us with 555. We have had 13 deaths. We had 4 deaths yesterday, no further today. And we've carried out, and the Health Minister, Greg Hunt, has been trumpeting this, 184,000 coronavirus tests have been conducted across Australia. And if you look at that total compared to the tests that have been undertaken, it's a very low positive rate. And so we're clearly trying to emulate the South Korean model here with widespread testing. A lot of the deaths we had yesterday, and a lot of the recent infections that we've had, is because the New South Wales Health Authorities allowed a cruise ship called the Ruby Princess to dock last Thursday because it was deemed low risk. 2,700 passengers on that were allowed to disembark in Sydney and go to anywhere in Australia. I think about 162 cases of coronavirus have been linked to the disembarking of that cruise ship, because there were people who had tested positive to coronavirus on that cruise ship. And it's probably the biggest government stuff up to date that was allowed to happen, because we had was the Diamond Princess that was off the coast of Japan, that was quarantine there. And there's still a number of cruise ships around the world which are not going to be allowed to be disembarked. And I've never been on a cruise ship before, but I would never go on one ever, because you can go from trip of a lifetime to the holiday from hell just like that. And it seems to be like an incubation. Obviously, they've got an older... a lot of people in their retirement go on cruises, but that's quite a problem that governments around the world, these cruise ships which go all around the world.
Yes, I used to always think that I would never want to go on a cruise ship, and then I remember a few months ago somebody who had been on one tell me, "Oh, yeah, it's really nice. They really enjoyed it, and it was great." And I thought, "Oh, maybe it's something that I'll do one day." But I suspect that the cruise ship industry is not going to recover very well very quickly, and even the airline industry is going to take a lot of time to get back to where it was. And probably permanent changes at borders after this is certainly a possibility. Although, of course, the globalists will try and have their border arrangements back to normal as quickly as they can. Just a one-off fluke. Everything's fine, guys. Nothing to worry about.
There was also that cruise ship which docked at White Island when the volcano erupted there, which another cruise ship, well, not directly related to the cruise ship, but it was people on a cruise who either died or got severely burnt.
Absolutely. It's not been a good year for the cruise ship business. It's not really been a good year for that many people now. There are a lot of jokes out there about the 90-day trial on 2020. It has been quite a chaotic year, and some people are saying this is the start to not just a chaotic year, but a chaotic decade, and we shall see how that all shapes up.
Obviously, you're a Christian, Dieuwe. I had Daniel Seckham on my first Wilms Front for the week, where he's an end times Christian believer, and so he was talking about the culture wars, the degeneracy that we've seen has led up to this pandemic. I just want to get your perspective on that.
Lagging on me at the moment.
Or did you not hear any of
Sorry,
that?
I missed all that. All I heard was I used to I heard you started on end times and then you lagged out.
Yeah.
And
Well,
froze.
do you, as a Christian, do you believe that this is a part of end times, or that God's removed his protection?
I think the last thing definitely is probably a given. But I don't believe that this is the end. This is the end of the world per se. I do think that there are cycles and symbols and patterns that manifest themselves in crises like this. But no, I don't believe that this is the end of the world. But we do see some very interesting things in the way this virus has spread. Where it's sort of it's come from this authoritarian communist regime. It's spread around the world. It's reached New Zealand. It's essentially transformed our country into the place that it came from. It's transformed our country into the I don't want to say communist regime, but we essentially now are in a position where the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has unlimited power. She can now, with these emergency resolutions, alter any law in the country with the stroke of a pen. Parliament has been suspended completely. The lockdown is in place for a minimum of 4 weeks, but it's actually indefinite. People have been talking about months. In fact, she once said 4 months and didn't really correct herself. So, that's up in the air as to how long this is going to be. Obviously, the economy is not going to be able to handle that, but I'm not sure that's a concern at this point. The real interesting thing for me is in what's essential at this point, right? Only things that are essential are open. And so we can really see what are the values, what are the choices that are being made by Jacinda down through the government, through various agencies, and even within businesses and communities themselves, what's essential. And we see that the obvious things like grocery stores, supermarkets are essential. But then we have cases where the fresh fruit and veggie stores and the Mad Butcher and various other butchers are not essential.
Really?
So
they've shut down in New Zealand?
They've shut down.
That
They've
hasn't
shut down the
happened
butchers.
in Australia.
They've shut down the butchers. They've shut down the fresh
Wow.
fruit and veggie stores. You have to go to one of the duopoly supermarkets.
Yeah, which that seems incredibly discriminatory, because Scott Morrison and his Finance Minister Matthias Cormann and Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, they want to keep the economy going as much as possible. And so food markets are still allowed to a degree, as long as they practice the social distancing. But we still have butchers and greengrocers still open. We even have electrical stores and phone shops still open. It's the social
and I'm
gathering
totally
places.
opposed to something like a total lockdown like this. I see in Australia, they're saying that beer is essential. I was just going to come to this bit as well. So alcohol and the supply of alcohol has been deemed essential. The bottle shops have been closed, but you can buy alcohol from the supermarket. But there are certain parts of the country that are governed by what are known as liquor trusts, and these liquor trusts are open because they have a monopoly on the supply of alcohol. And because alcohol and booze is a necessity in this time, they're allowed to remain open. So we have a very high priority on food, apparently, but only the big supermarkets. And then anybody involved in creating food or the food supply is theoretically allowed to be open as well. So if you're the Cookie Time Cookie Factory, you can be open. You're essential, because Cookie Time cookies are essential goods. So the decisions being made around what's essential becomes very, very, very interesting. We come into the realm where we already mentioned the mainstream media is essential. The banking system is, of course, essential. Credit rating services are essential. Even the horse racing industry has been deemed essential because the horses need to remain fit and be continually trained. So we can't have the horse racing industry get wiped out. That's an essential. Obviously, abortions are essential. Those are continuing as usual. And then you say, well, what's not essential is, of course, churches are not essential.
Yeah,
churches,
we've had our churches shut as well, places of worship.
Yep, completely shut down. Any place of worship is shut down. Obviously, we talked last week about the voluntary shutdown where churches rush to shut down. But even the ones that stayed open, they're now all gone. It's a crime. It will be a crime to have any kind of religious gathering. The police have talked about powers to raid houses, to break up gatherings in houses.
You're used to that.
Yeah, well, I'm used to that. Yes, they can enter your house without a warrant now, by the way. So that makes it makes it a lot easier. They can break into anybody's house. They can requisition any supplies. They can take any property that they need, and so obviously every service, every kind of activity contains a risk. Then in this disease, of this pestilence, this virus is dangerous and at risk. But what's not at risk is people standing in large queues in supermarkets, people handling things in supermarkets using, the credit card, the FPOS machines. There's no real protective gear being worn there. We've been told in the hospitals by people who have had to go to the hospitals the past few days to say there's very little personal protective equipment being worn, no masks, because that we just don't have enough of them. Medicines are probably starting to be rationed now. Obviously, pharmacies are open. I don't believe I mentioned those directly. So we see this big thing. What is being valued, and funerals are completely restricted down to the absolute bare minimum. You basically can't have anybody attend a funeral.
Ours is limited to 10 people, although they are going to allow a bit of leeway if the deceased had a large family.
And so none of that has really been discussed here, and we shall see how that develops. So we have the obvious case here now where, especially from a Christian perspective, we're looking at this. What's essential, what's happening, what's open is the banking industry is open. The shops, many shops at least, are open. The abortion clinics are open. But anything to do with church, anything to do with religion, any kind of pastor or priest or minister is not allowed to perform any of their duties because they are absolutely non-essential, and including things like funerals and so on. And the social distancing we see is not necessarily, while in a sense required. If you're an essential service, you're an essential worker, you don't have to enforce the social distancing because in many cases they can't, right? If they're standing shoulder to shoulder on a factory line, or they're working in an aluminium smelter, for instance, that's still open because it's too expensive to close the aluminium smelter. So the people's lives there theoretically are at risk, but it's worth the risk because there's money involved in some of these industries, which is why they're being kept open. And so there's a lot of very disturbing choices being made in terms of what's essential. And there's very little protest being made as well. At least here in New Zealand, I've seen no protests from any churches or any clergy or anyone to say, hey, actually, no, we are essential. We're staying open. None of that's been said. The warehouse claimed they were staying open. They tried. They got shut down. Various other some stores selling cheap Chinese goods, they actually opened on Monday, and some of them were shut down. Some of them were asked to close. I just saw this afternoon some bakeries in some places had been asked to close because they were deemed to be non-essential, but they had continued.
We've still got our Baker's Delight and all those Brumbies, that's still open.
Yeah. And I did hear a couple of, and I see Roman Catholics in the chat there. No last rites for Roman Catholics either, or any other religions that may have last rites. The Sistema Plastic Box Company was allowed to stay open, and they did stay open until staff walked off the factory line. So there are some of these services that are deemed essential where staff have simply walked away. But yeah, coming back to that, various commercial businesses have tried really hard to stay open, to say, oh, we're essential, we're making the case that we're essential, we're going to open anyway. And, then the police have come to shut them down. That's happened. But there has been no talk about any kind of pushback from the religious sphere. So it's the case where, in a sense, God has left New Zealand, and even the church deems itself to be absolutely unimportant in this. If you engage with any of them online, and this is not targeted at any Christians in particular, but I've had some arguments with some, is they say, oh, well, people can sit at home and pray or whatever, but that's not the core of Christianity. That's not the core of worship. It's the gathering together of the church that makes worship, that makes the core of Christianity. It involves people being together, and generally speaking, they could still maintain social distancing, right? Plenty of countries have their churches open, but with various gatherings limited. People are able to go to the house of God and pray. All of that is a crime in New Zealand at the moment, right? You'd be threatened. You'd be risking imprisonment. At least fines, probably, and possibly imprisonment for doing that in New Zealand. And that's the situation that we're in, and that's a pretty dark situation for me as a Christian. And I've come across a lot more people, and I'm coming across more people that are seeing that. And the religious leadership and the clergy have been utterly spineless in New Zealand. If someone has seen some examples of them, making any kind of protest or any case for their essentialness, or even trying to just go out there and perform their duties as they should be doing, basically seeing if the government will attempt to interfere. I have not seen any of that happen here in New Zealand. And that, I think, is, to me, the most disturbing of all of this.
We did speculate on our last show that New Zealand definitely does have the capability and willingness to go to a full lockdown police state, and you're led by a godless communist in Jacinta Ardern, and so she obviously has no qualms about shutting down places of worship. But in Australia, we're led by a Pentecostal Christian, Scott Morrison, and that the left can't go one day without mentioning his relationship with the Hillsong megachurch and its leader, Brian Houston. And there was some, I think I might have mentioned it last week, there was a conspiracy theory going around that he didn't introduce the restrictions on indoor and outdoor gatherings, which was part of stage 1, until the Monday, so the Hillsong conference could finish. I think that's quite a bit of a large stretch. What Scott Morrison has tried to do throughout ramping up these containment measures, and also you have to remember that Australia is a federation, so what's termed the National Cabinet now, with the Prime Minister and all the state and territory premiers and chief ministers, they originally met twice a week, but I think they're now meeting 3 times a week now. It's actually functioning quite well, even though it's a mixture of Liberal and Labor leaders. Victoria and New South Wales, they have said that they want to introduce go to stage 3, whatever that is, sooner, because that's where all the cases are. And Scott Morrison said, I understand that where there's a cluster of cases in a certain state, they may want to take extra measures as well. And also because we are a federation, basically all the states have closed their borders now. I think the only one that's not shut is between Victoria and New South Wales, ironically. But the biggest, I would say, enforcement challenge is between New South Wales and Queensland, because Tweed Heads, Coolangatta are the twin cities. So obviously a lot of people, northern New South Wales, Tweed Heads, go into Queensland there, and there's the border shop there. Border stop, and they notice your number plate there, ask you questions. Why are you going here? Is it essential here? Well, the reason why we went to stage 2 on Monday morning, which was the closure of pubs, clubs, restaurants, bars, gyms, and places of worship, is because on the weekend the social distancing guidelines were being frequently ignored by. The obvious example was people at Bondi Beach, or congregating in at bars and cafes all around Australia. And so, again, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and the Chief Medical Officer, Professor Brendan Murphy, were they did another tut at us, very disappointed about this, so we're going to have to. But restaurants and cafes, they can do takeaway or home delivery now. So a lot of restaurants and cafes that have had to shut their dine-in are trying to get on the delivery apps now. That's where, because we do have a liberal government which respects free enterprise, they're trying to make the economy adjust as much as possible.
And that's not happening here. Delivery services have all been shut down. And again, I was talking about these businesses that were claiming they were staying open. Pizza Hut, I know it was Domino's specifically. Domino's had proclaimed they were staying open and they were going to deliver pizzas. And if you were over 70, you could get a free meal delivered to you every week. They were clearly trying to stay open. And Jacinda came in and said, nope, any deliveries of any cooked food is gone. Any takeaway is gone. Uber Eats is gone. Just huge parts of the economy totally shut down. The police were at the beach on the first morning, making sure people didn't go to the beach, trying to just making sure that people were, dissuaded from that. They did step back from that a little bit to say you could drive to the beach if it was the closest thing to you or the closest park to you, then you could drive. But otherwise, you're not even allowed to drive anywhere unless you're going to undertaking an essential service.
And is that, are the police doing random stops to say, where are you going, and that sort of thing? Because that hasn't happened in...
No, that's happening here. I've seen some videos, police checkpoints, pulling everybody over, asking people, what are you doing? Where are you going? Where have you been? The first person has been arrested this morning and appeared in court. I'm not sure what kind of fine they're facing. But they are ramping up their enforcement here and ensuring that people stay put, stay inside, or if they are going for walks or bicycle rides, they're not going too far from their houses. But all of this, that's being taken seriously. But then you hear the stories elsewhere. So you're as I mentioned already, you people saying they went to the hospitals. There's no staff wearing masks there, or even gloves. Why? Because they don't have enough. You go to the supermarkets. People are lined up outside the supermarkets. Supermarket hours have been restricted, so everyone comes at these hours where they're open. All of the other stores have been closed. Although some dairies, I should mention, some dairies are open, but you can only have one person in a dairy at a time. So what do you have? You've got people standing outside the dairy. Sometimes maintaining their social distance, sometimes not. And then people go in, they touch stuff, they use the FPOS machines. You're bringing more people together in these clustered spaces. If you've got a single cashier that's sick, they're going to infect 100 or hundreds of people. If somebody who has the virus goes into the store, touches all of these things.
And have the supermarkets introduced quantity restrictions?
Yes, as well. So 2 of every item was restricted about a week ago. Prices are going up through the roof. With people talking, Amy could confirm this for me if she's watching. I think $12 for a cauliflower.
Wow.
20 something dollars for a chicken. Those are the kinds of prices that people are dealing with in the supermarkets.
That seems horrible there. I mean, people have joked here about the purchase limits and the lines, the empty shelves in Australia being full communism, but the quantity limits have been enforced by the supermarkets themselves. We are seeing capitalism help solve a lot of the problems that the containment measures are seeing here. The governments, all levels of governments, have cut red tape to allow deliveries at all hours. Pharmacies can now trade 24 hours a day.
It's the complete opposite of what's happened here.
Yeah, and you can even get in New South Wales now takeaway cocktails from bars that have shut now.
Yeah. No, just the absolute opposite happening here. Red tape is continuing to be piled up. People are already fighting over their bailout, which bailouts and which bits of money they can get from the government, handouts. Today they had to guarantee various wages up to a certain rates. Unemployment is now shooting through the roof. Probably, it'll be in the double digits now. It could end up being as high as 20% within a couple of weeks. Let's see, what else have we got? I've just been told here we go in the chat here. I might as well read it out. $30 for an uncooked chicken, $8 for a loaf of bread, and about $8 to $11 for a cauliflower and broccoli.
Has there been because if the supermarkets in Australia,
and supposedly we make enough food to feed 50 million.
All that the supermarkets have done here in Australia is just end a lot of the specials. There hasn't been a drastic...
All the specials have ended here as well.
Increases in price. You can still get in our supermarkets a home brand packet of pasta for 90 cents, less than $1. If there was a drastic increase in price, I think you'd have riots in Australia. But New Zealand, you're just laying over and taking
it's illegal. It's illegal to riot. So, and the and the riot police are on standby. The army is on standby. They could be deployed at a moment's notice. As essentially as riot police, they would be using the army as riot police. You're not allowed to protest anything the government does. Like I said, Jacinda could change any law with the stroke of a pen.
Was that new powers granted to her
no,
by the Parliament?
These were already in the civil. I cannot remember the name of the bill. Something like the National Emergency Management Act.
Yeah, that's
2008. I think 2008 is when those were implemented. Yeah.
Yeah, we have in Victoria what is it, a state of emergency, and we got told this week that there's one above it now. There's a state of disaster, but law enforcement here is mainly focused on those who have been given orders to quarantine and isolate for 14 days are complying with that now. And police in New South Wales and Victoria have been doing door-to-door to checking that people who've been instructed to isolate are doing so, and they've been issuing on-the-spot fines of in excess $1,000. The same with businesses that have been ordered to shut. We had... it was announced on Wednesday night that beauticians had to close as well, and there was what was also announced was a 30-minute limit on hairdressing appointments, but then there was a female backlash there, and so that rule has been scrapped here. So
you don't have to worry about hairdressing and beauticians here in New Zealand because you can't go outside anyway. So you're not allowed to stop and talk to your friend. Like, you're not allowed to stop and talk to your friends, but you're not allowed to stop and talk to anybody on the streets. They say don't stop and talk to anybody. Keep walking. And talking about all of these prices before, where the people who are going to get hammered the hardest are the poor and the poorest people, right? The people who are wealthy, what do they care? The banks, what do they care? They're going to have more money than ever when this is over. The supermarkets, are loving it because they're now monopolies, state sanctioned monopolies. There will be price gouging legislation probably coming out within the next couple of days, because now Jacinda is going to go and sign off on some kind of thing to tell them to stop raising prices, and she'll fix the prices. So perhaps we'll go back to the sort of the 80s in New Zealand, where the Prime Minister can set the price of a piece of a head of broccoli and a loaf of bread, and she'll write out a list of exactly how much everything's supposed to cost. So that's the next stage now.
You've got a precedent in New Zealand for a Prime Minister to take over the whole of the economy, like Sir Robert Muldoon did in the 80s. He was actually a National Party Prime Minister, and then it was the Labour Party that sort of unshackled everything when they came to power.
But it doesn't matter who's in power. If National had been in power, they would have done the same thing here. By the way, we'd be living in a National Party dictatorship utopia. It would probably be less bad. I would hope they would have more of a Scott Morrison approach, even though I think there is plenty to criticize about what Scott Morrison is doing, as we've already said. But compared to New Zealand, it sounds like you're living in utopia at this point.
Yeah, even our Premier, Daniel Andrews, he's often been compared to Jacinda Ardern, far left Premier, but it's still you're relatively free to move around Victoria. It's basically governments, both state and federal, telling you to do the right thing. Don't leave the house unless it's absolutely essential for work or essential supplies. And the main thing that they're focusing on is because 2/3 of infections have been related to people coming overseas. And there was footage that was released from Sydney Airport on Wednesday, which showed that social distancing was not even being observed by at the airport, even though they're the people most likely to have the coronavirus. So now they've announced today that people who come back into Australia, it's not just you're told to self-isolate. Now it's mandatory isolation. The government is now going to be occupying hotels to lock people in there for 14 days, which because this is what is emerging here is because most people now have sucked this up that we have to shut down sectors of the economy, find different ways of doing things so we can contain and defeat this virus. And so when they see scenes like that at Sydney Airport and they hear about these stories of people from
then
overseas,
it's a joke, right? It's not serious.
From overseas flaunting the self-isolation guidelines, people get very pissed and say, are you... come on, like you've shut down all our businesses. Can you please make sure that you're enforcing it? And this is where the next stage is, that those who've been told to self-isolate, are given orders to self-isolate, are isolating, and they're the only people that are being bothered at the moment by the authorities and being fined. Nobody's been threatened with jail yet.
We have had a situation where the border has essentially been left open. Once the virus is in the country, it's still open. Now that we've gone into lockdown, the border was essentially still open. There was still no proper checks or enforcement. Nobody was taken into quarantine. The entire country was quarantined, and people were still allowed to just waltz in through the airport and go wherever they wanted in the country. There was no quarantine enforcement, and that should have been in place, weeks, if more likely a month or 2 months ago. They should have been starting, enforced quarantine and checking where these people who were coming into the country were going, making sure that we didn't end up in this situation. But this is a case like with terrorism, where the borders are left open and, terrorists come into the country and then cause all kinds of problems, and then our freedoms have to be curtailed, right? Terrorists come here, they blow things up, they kill people. We lose out. We pay the price. People in this country and in other countries in around the world, whether it's Europe or America or Australia, people there die. Things there are blown up, and then there have to be restrictions put in place. And it's essentially the same thing with this virus, where the border has been the last thing that's closed. The people coming in have been the last ones that have had any kind of restrictions placed upon them. And the people who are living here and going about their business, they've had their entire lives turned upside down. But there is still at this stage sort of loving adoration being sent up to Saint Jacinda. Where people saying, oh, this is so wonderful how well she's reacted. She's moved faster than anybody else, and she's done all of these wonderful things to put us into lockdown. I don't know if people are still going to be singing her praises when this is all over, but it's a case where likely, regardless, because with all of the the millions of dollars of media propaganda behind her, she'll get all of the praise for whatever happens, averting a disaster. It would have been so much worse if Saint Jacinda hadn't done these things for us. And the big thing that will be swept under the carpet will be the fact that there was no preparation done until it was way too late.
It's different again in Australia, and in fact that there is still scrutiny by the media on all levels of government here, and that's why people have there has been so much anger expressed about what happened at Sydney Airport with the Ruby Princess being allowed to disembark, and it seems that in New Zealand everyone's just being compliant and relying on the dear leader. Here it's being obviously Scott Morrison and the federal government issue the social distancing guidelines and which businesses are allowed to operate, but it's a lot of it's up to community enforcement, and we are seeing that return to community spirit, and that everyone's got to do the right thing. The sort of the at all Scott Morrison can basically do for the to the general population is as he did with his speech about panic buying. It's like, stop it, it's unnecessary, but just basically either tell us off or praise us. And I mentioned that he's last week he said he was disappointed about the beaches and the pubs and the restaurants. This Friday he said, I've been very glad that the social distancing guidelines are being adhered to, that there's traffic in the cities is down 2/3. Good job, everybody. Gold star. That's sort of the extent of what the Prime Minister is requesting of those who haven't been asked to isolate.
And that would be a far less devastating approach. And the idea here is that lives are being saved, but it will remain to be seen. Nobody has died yet. If in the end nobody dies, then more people will end up committing suicide because their entire lives have been destroyed. As happened after the financial crisis, people's entire lives are destroyed. And at what point is somebody's entire livelihood, their entire way of life, on a mass scale, worth more than the potential risk? That's the thing. Freedom always comes with risks. You always, everything that you do has a risk. And as we were talking about at the beginning of the show, everything that was allowed to remain open, every little thing that's so deemed essential, even though many of these things should not be, they have these value put on them, and people make these calculations when they normally live their lives, and all of that's gone, right? And there's no choices there. Everyone is following the state-approved plan, the state-set plan. Everyone has to take, in that sense, the same risk, and will pay out. But the pain will not fall equally, and especially those who are lower down on the social ladder. They're the ones who are going to get squashed by this, and then they're going to pick this up with these social programs. So we can talk a little bit about the economy. Anyway, when before Parliament was suspended, they signed a blank check to Grant Robertson for $50 billion, which is basically
finance minister.
He's the finance minister. That's basically, for perspective, is the amount that the government makes in taxes every year. So, which they tax about 20 to 30% in income. So that's basically 20-30% of GDP as a blank check. It's either all borrowed or printed. They're doing a huge amounts of quantitative easing. There's a 10% GDP drop for the quarter predicted, probably more. Unemployment, I already mentioned, double digits, probably going to go as high as 20%. And while we make all of these jokes about socialism and communism, there's not going to be any form of true socialism or true communism here. The banks are going to win and the poor are going to get shafted.
It's basically...
And the free money they're going to get they're not going to buy them anything, right? It's like, oh yes, wonderful. I've got my 1,000 Jacinda bucks, and now I can go and buy a loaf of bread for 1,000 Jacinda bucks. That's the kind of situation that people are going to end up in.
It's more like a fascist state where in New Zealand, where Jacinta is directing what private companies can and can't do.
Exactly. Everything's still privatized, but it's being directed by the government. And communist China is in that state as well. We really have copied the situation of China. Like I said, the virus has come here, and suddenly we have the Chinese government, right, where they have the they've created this version of communism and this blend of communism and fascism that is ruthless and seems to work for them, but it's not this where New Zealand is headed at this point looks to be an absolute disaster.
We have got a super chat from Clark Key for $5 New Zealand. Thank you so much. He hasn't left a message on that, but thank you for that. And
I'll read out his latest message here anyway in the chat. He says, "Remember where it came from, never forget." And that's right. It's like the communist virus, and China is responsible. And when this is all over, China needs to pay the China virus. When this is over, everybody needs to take a good hard look as to how they're going to be dealing with China.
And basically the original hypothesis of where it came from, bat soup at that wet market, is not far off the mark, because it did originate from bat coronavirus. It might not have been bat soup specifically, but it was from unhygienic food.
Probably the preparation process of putting bats together, or the keeping of bats in their bio lab. that's likely, the place. Or somebody walking into the bush and getting bitten by a bat or something. You never know. And they buried it. They persecuted the people who tried to be the whistleblowers on this, and they buried it and hid it from us instead of letting it be dealt with. And we've got a correction in the chat as well, is that Clarky is actually a she. So apologies there for the misgendering.
Misgender, sorry.
That minus 10 social credit points for you, Tim.
Oh, yes. Make sure that if you are planning to send through a super chat, put your pronouns in.
Yeah. So, of course, is what's happening in Overreach. It certainly is looking like it. This is not what I would have done. Of course, I'm not in charge. But I'm seeing this from more and more people across the board looking at this saying, this is not really what we were expecting. This is not really what I would have done. And there's a lot of people across the spectrum saying that. Of course, the propaganda has set in, but we will see what the fruit of it is and what happens. But it's the predictions of the death toll around the world are being revised down, even with just normal social distancing, even with people just being aware of the virus, and rather than the drastic measures. So is the cure looking like it could be worse than the disease? That is certainly possible, and we're about to find out, because various countries have taken a different path, and we're going to find out which countries are spared and which are not, and perhaps based on their histories and things that they have done. The approach seems to be driven a lot by the sort of the spiritual nature of the country. Actually seems to be driving the response to a certain extent as well.
Now all governments across the Western world, they want to avoid being in Italy, where they're having to make decisions about who lives and dies, and the death toll nearly rises by 1,000 every day. The strategy with all of these containment measures is to flatten the curve and make sure that they're not so draconian that we can, as described, getting to the bridge on the other side. But we saw at the beginning of this week, when the pubs and clubs and all those other venues where social gatherings happen, the Centrelink queues, our welfare office, were huge around the country. They weren't adhering to social distancing, but if you just lost your job, then I know it's probably not the main thing on your mind. And our government services website, MyGov, crashed. We probably have the most incompetent minister in charge of government services at the moment, Stuart Roberts, who he previously resigned from the ministry over a China trip, which he didn't declare was from a donor. It was a complex thing like that. He's called also accident prone as well. Because he doesn't live in the CBD, he had a mobile broadband connection, and he racked up $38,000 worth of excess charges, which he paid back. But he's the minister in charge of Centrelink Robo-Debt program, which is going after people who just Centrelink's algorithms has claimed that they're owed money. And of course, that's distressing people, threatening them with legal action. But he's able to pay back $38,000, no questions asked. And so Greg Hunt, the federal health minister, he's always had a technocratic approach, which is sort of what you want in a crisis such as this. He's been very good, but then in charge of government services, Stuart Robert, and he said, we upgraded the MyGov website so that it would be able to have 55,000 concurrent visitors. I didn't expect it on the Monday to have over 100,000. Oh, sorry, that was my bad.
Yeah. At least you have some entertainment during these dark times, Tim. I might wrap up a little bit of the sort of talking about how bad could this be, and there's some chatter in the chat there about that, and especially secondary causes, healthcare systems that can't deal with this.
Yes.
More more primitive countries, even like Italy, is actually quite a dysfunctional country. and they have a lot of this touchy-feely stuff going
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that other countries have
They
less
had
of.
a prime minister for a number of years who was known for not practicing social distancing at events.
Yeah. So that happens. Older population, obviously, older people are always more affected. Are going to have more health complications. The virus itself essentially is that of the common cold, a bad version of it that could lead to pneumonia, lead to other cases, weaken your immune system. You're in hospital. You're great. You've got a great chance of catching developing complications, catching other things in the hospital, various other viruses and bacteria that are so-called superbugs. You become more and more and more at risk of having these things pile onto you, and that's how these hospital systems get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But if you're a functional country, it's not that hard to have the market expand rapidly if it's able to put down new areas that can be used to put ICU wards in, to make more ventilators, just like that. They can
Well,
an entrepreneur makes more ventilators, and then you've got your ventilator supply fixed up,
that's what we're seeing
countries are able
in
to react like that.
Australia. You've made me feel, talking to you tonight, made me and probably our Australian audience feel so much better that, we're not doing too badly in Australia. We're all doing the right thing. Things aren't as bad as they are in New Zealand, which I guess is cold comfort for you.
Yeah, I'm not happy. Again, I suspect in terms of people dying of the virus, we're going to be much better off than you. But in the greater scheme of things, I don't really see a situation where at this point we're going to be coming out better than you once it's all over. Because again, I think we're in a situation where the cure very much could be looking like it's worse than the disease.
And there was also a shock development this week with the Christchurch killer Brenton Tarrant changed his plea from not guilty to guilty for murdering those 51 worshippers, which was quite unexpected. We don't know why he changed his plea, but there is certainly, from the direction I've seen in New Zealand, a sense of relief.
Absolutely, that's the biggest case there, where I think almost everybody was relieved. I suppose I might as well explain sort of what happened. Is he had his trial scheduled for this month. It was done via sort of teleconference.
Yeah, we actually saw him on the video link.
They decided to stop blurring his face and his name, etc., etc. He pled guilty. Nobody necessarily knows why. People can speculate. Since we're running out of time, there's not a huge amount of me. Not a huge amount of time. There's not a huge amount of benefit to me trying to speculate anyway. The victims don't have to go through a trial, because since he's pled guilty, there's no trial. He's simply been declared guilty of all of the 90 or so charges.
Their victim impact statements for sentencing.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's still coming. The sentencing's still coming in a month. We don't really know. There's some questions that are going to be unanswered, and that's, in a sense, the downside here, because a lot of questions around what the police have done, what the police could have done, that's potentially all gone unless the royal inquiry comes back with more information. That royal inquiry has been delayed. At this point in time, in this month, jury trials had been suspended.
Yeah,
so he wasn't
well.
able to get a jury trial.
We've had pretty much all our courts shut down. It's going to be by teleconferencing our legal system.
So same situation here. So beyond that, we don't really know much. But I think everybody is relieved in that sense that it's done. Is guilty. People can, except perhaps for the people who had unanswered conspiracy theories, will be unsatisfied. We don't have to go through this, being dragged on. I'm a big advocate for that justice should be done quickly and be seen to be done. The fact that it took over a year to get him to trial anyway is far too long. he whatever the sentence is going to be, and there's some speculation he may have had some kind of plea deal to avoid life without parole, but that seems unlikely, and he would still get, he'd still be indefinitely imprisoned.
Even if if it was life with and a non-parole period, there would be no parole board.
There would be no exactly, and so that's the situation.
One of our biggest mass killers in Australia, Julian Knight, the Hoddle Street shooter, he's had countless parole hearings. They've all been knocked back.
Yeah. I mean, it is a case where we don't really have. I often prefer to talk about a legal system rather than a justice system, because the justice aspect is generally always missing, because there's no real justice that comes out of this, except, I mean, he goes into prison for the rest of his life on the taxpayer dime, and hopefully that's the end that we see of it. He should be deported.
Yes, I know that
deporting him. That's not going to happen.
The question is now, I saw journalists are just into, can you ship him back to Australia? Because, well, I know that given we're deporting all of our criminals
we should,
to New Zealand.
But she's not going to do it.
It would be a trump card in the deportation war.
Could be, and probably should be. But that's it's not big. And on that topic a little bit, we do have the whole subject of borders being back, and in that perhaps it may be more palatable now to deport people, because Jacinda did finally deport some tourists who had been flouting the isolation rules. So she's actually started deporting people.
To her credit, she cracked down on these non-isolationists quicker than Australia has.
Yeah, and at the same time, on the subject of prisoners, we also have our parliament. I say our parliament, our ruling committee, our central committee has decided to push through some legislation to allow prisoners to vote in the September election. There's going to be about 2,000 of these prisoners will be allowed to vote, and if they're serving sentences of less than 3 years. You think, less than 3 years, it's not very serious. On average, somebody who gets a less than 3 year sentence has to have 50 convictions. So these 2,000 criminals have have an average of 50 convictions each, and they're serving less than 3 years in prison, and they'll be allowed to vote. This is what the government thinks is very important. Again, this is essential government business during this time of crisis. Coming back to we had this beginning at the beginning of the inversion here. The pattern that we see here on what is deemed essential, and we can look very closely at what do people find important, what does the government find important. What does society find important? And we're sitting here discussing prisoners voting.
Well, tomorrow in Queensland we have local government elections, which most councils have compulsory polling booth attendance. There has been a lot of people saying that these should be suspended, given that it's going to be so hard to socially distance. But of course, this is democracy. People have been campaigning for months. You can't really, other than make sure that the Electoral Commission of Queensland has the resources to make sure that the social distancing is enforced, that there is personal hygiene, and that otherwise
and that people don't have to touch the same pen.
Otherwise that will just be another example of how governments have shut down people's businesses, yet they still can't manage social distancing in their own operations.
And and again, that's the case where you make these value judgments. You say, yes, democracy is important. We're going to keep democracy up and running. The only person I think we had, at least in Parliament, David Seymour, was the one who opposed the shutting down of Parliament. Because is democracy essential? Is a question he asked. Is democracy essential? I would say yes, but the Parliament themselves decided democracy was not essential. The nation in general does not seem to think that democracy is that essential. There's not been any real outcry about that.
Our Parliament's not meeting until August now. Federal Parliament, which, given that all the state and territory borders are shutting,
there's no real point, right?
It would be an example of governments not following their own rules if they're allowed to travel into Canberra, and in Parliament now they've got to practice social distancing. We had a reduced Parliament at the beginning of
we don't even have reduced Parliament anymore
this week, and we have had the federal budget moved to October because economic modelling is all gone out the window. I think maybe because when because it's in 6 months' time when that is the time frame for these containment measures, we might all get a heart attack when the Treasury gets up and just how much we've spent to contain this virus and to compensate those affected.
Yeah. We shall see how this develops. Likely, we're going to be doing a lot more lockdown shows. There'll be a lot more coronavirus shows. I think the focus of a lot of these shows will continue to be on this subject and how it develops, because it doesn't seem like anybody's going to be talking about anything else for a long time.
I'll be at home again next week, as will you. With the way things are going in New Zealand, I hope you're allowed to access the internet.
Yep, I'll need to ask the government for my state approved license to use the internet and broadcast.
Yes,
that'll be down the line. It seems like they are not so concerned with what people are doing in their houses, except for, of course, as long as you're the police has even said it. People need to sit on the couch and watch Netflix, basically. So that's what the government has requested. So sit on the couch, watch Netflix, and drink booze. That's what the government would like you to be doing. And so that's exactly what I'm not doing. Keeping busy, I still get to work. While campaigning for the election has been suspended, at the moment everyone's cancelled campaigning. It's not realistic to keep doing that, of course. But the September election is still coming up. And as of today, I can announce as well that I am running as a candidate in the election for the new Conservative Party. So I have been some jokes in the chat about criminals voting for me. Not likely, unless unless the government is planning to send me on a little visit to their local prison.
Well, if they arrest and imprison all the worshippers, then you will have prisoners voting for you.
Yeah, maybe then. That's right. All of the Christians who get imprisoned over the next couple of weeks or months can vote for me. There you go. So thank you for finding me a constituency, Tim. That's very encouraging.
All right, we'll leave it at that for now. When I say stay safe, Dieuwe, I'm not. It's not directed at you, because I know that you'll be responsible to help contain the coronavirus. It's more stay safe from the clutches of the state.
I will. I've been sort of isolating a little bit before the quarantine. Anyway, I had no reason to really leave the house very much, except for essential shopping and so on. And of course, church back when it was still legal. But beyond that, doing my part. Since we're doing this anyway, we may as well not stuff it up. But there are plenty of people who are not being very serious, and again, I have my reservations about how effective this is going to be. A lot of people are now in the situation where they're afraid and they want to try anything, and that's usually the case where you've now sacrificed so much liberty for security that it's the security that ends up destroying you.
Well, we're basically taking it one day at a time in Australia with when the daily infection numbers are released, because we know that if the infection numbers begin to go down, then the curve will flatten and this will be over sooner rather than later. But we're against and this is what our treasurer Josh Frydenberg said, we're against an enemy which has no face, no flag. This virus does not play by any type of human rules. It doesn't care about your feelings or your facts.
No. So everyone there, if you can, please do stay safe. Don't panic. Don't be afraid. And we will be back next week with the show. We've gone a little bit over time. I may be doing some more writing on rightminds.nz. If you do want to help keep the website up and running, you can go to rightminds.nz/donate. Looking for some monthly contributors there, just $5 a month to keep the website up and running. Whether I'll be doing much more writing will remain to be seen, because I can keep working. I'm busy. I've got 3 kids at home. Everybody's going crazy. I've got to find some way to keep them entertained and get my work done. So I feel like this week I've been far busier than in previous weeks, actually. So I'm hoping that everything sort of calms down a little bit and we get into a new pattern. And we just accept this for what it is, and see what we can do to change it, and look forward into the future and to what changes we can make.
And some breaking news at the end of the show. St Kilda Beach in Melbourne has been closed after crowds ignore self-distancing guidelines. I didn't even know that St Kilda Beach was still open. So
Yeah.
Mayor Dick Gross of Port Phillip, I'm not sure if he made that call or it was the state government, but it shows that not all beaches are shut in Australia like they are in New Zealand.
No, and the again, your beach is sort of open if you live next door to it, but the police are checking on these beaches regularly, and we are clearly much further along than where you are here.
Yeah. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again next Friday night.
Good night.
Good night.
Stay safe, comrades.